April 5, 1942, Easter Sunday. In churches across Britain, the United States, and the rest of the Allied world, families knelt in pews, lit candles, and prayed for the war to end. In the warm waters of the Indian Ocean, a fleet of 5 aircraft carriers, 4 fast battleships, 3 cruisers, and a screen of destroyers cut through the swells at speed. The same pilots who had shattered the American Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor just 4 months earlier were now checking their instruments, warming their engines, and preparing to do it again. The target this time was Colombo, Ceylon. The date was not chosen by accident. A few months earlier, on February 15, 1942, Singapore fell to Japan. It was one of the largest surrenders in British military history. More than 80,000 British, Indian, and Australian troops became prisoners of war. Winston Churchill called it the worst disaster and largest capitulation in British history. The fall of Singapore did not just cost lives and land. It shattered the eastern defensive wall of the British Empire and left the Indian Ocean wide open. Ceylon, the island nation sitting at the southern tip of India, suddenly became the most important piece of real estate Britain still controlled in Asia. The island held critical naval bases at Colombo on the western coast and Trincomalee on the eastern coast. It controlled the sea lanes connecting Britain to India, to the Middle East, to the Persian Gulf oil fields. It also held most of the British Empire's rubber supply. Whoever controlled Ceylon controlled the Indian Ocean, and in early 1942, Japan wanted it. The Imperial Japanese Navy had been moving at extraordinary speed since Pearl Harbor. Vice Admiral Nagumo was in charge of the Kido Butai, the carrier strike force that launched the December 7th attack. They had barely slowed down. In January, Japanese aircraft devastated Allied airfields and naval installations across Southeast Asia. In February, they sank the British battleship Prince of Wales and British battlecruiser Repulse off the coast of Malaya, a loss that shocked the naval world and confirmed what some strategists had already suspected. The age of the battleship was ending, and the age of the aircraft carrier had arrived. By March 1942, Japanese forces occupied the Andaman Islands, just west of Burma, giving them a forward base within striking distance of Ceylon. Admiral Yamamoto, the architect of Pearl Harbor, issued the orders. The plan was straightforward. Send Nagumo and his carriers into the Indian Ocean, find the British Eastern Fleet, and destroy it. Then Japan would control the Indian Ocean from end to end. The man chosen to lead the airstrike was Commander Mitsuo Fuchida, who had led the first wave of aircraft over Pearl Harbor. He had circled above Oahu and radioed the signal that changed the world. Now he was preparing to do it again, this time over Colombo. The British knew something was coming. Their intelligence service, the Far East Combined Bureau, had been monitoring Japanese naval signals and correctly assessed that a major carrier operation into the Indian Ocean was being planned. The warning reached Vice Admiral Sir James Somerville, commander of the British Eastern Fleet, in late March. Somerville was given a rough window for the attack. He was told to expect it around April 1st. Somerville had a difficult hand to play. On paper, his Eastern Fleet looked strong. He had 3 carriers, 5 battleships, 7 cruisers, and 14 destroyers. Closer inspection told a different story. 2 of his carriers, HMS Formidable and HMS Indomitable, were still working up and operating obsolete aircraft. His 3rd carrier, HMS Hermes, was one of Britain's oldest, commissioned in 1924, too slow to keep pace with the others and carrying only 15 aircraft. 4 of his 5 battleships were old and slow, veterans of World War I era construction that could not keep up with the fast modern warships in the fleet. Against the 5 battle-hardened carriers and 4 modern battleships of Nagumo's Kido Butai, Somerville was facing long odds. In the face of this adversity, he made a critical decision. He dispersed his ships. Rather than leave them sitting in Colombo Harbor like it was Pearl Harbor, he moved the bulk of the fleet to a secret anchorage. Atoll, a remote group of islands in the Maldives, 600 miles southwest of Ceylon. The British called it Port T, and the Japanese had no idea it existed. Somerville sent his fleet south on March 30th and waited. April 1st came and went. No Japanese attack. His ships were running low on fuel and water. Somerville made a calculated judgment that the threat window had passed, and on April 4th he sent 2 heavy cruisers, HMS Cornwall and HMS Dorsetshire, back to Colombo. He sent the carrier Hermes and the destroyer HMAS Vampire to Trincomalee. He was preparing to return the rest of the fleet to Port T to refuel. He was wrong, though. The threat window had not passed. On April 4th, a Royal Canadian Air Force Catalina flying boat took off on a long patrol sector south of Ceylon. The pilot was squadron leader Leonard Birchall, a 26-year-old from St. Catharines, Ontario. Birchall and his crew had been given one of the southernmost patrol legs, flying out toward open ocean where there was nothing to find. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, at the southern end of their assigned route, they spotted something on the horizon. Ships, lots of ships. Birchall banked the Catalina and flew closer. What he saw below him was one of the most powerful naval forces ever assembled in the Indian Ocean. 5 aircraft carriers, 4 battleships, cruisers, destroyers. Nagumo's entire Kido Butai, moving north toward Ceylon at speed. Birchall immediately got on the radio and began transmitting. Japanese Zero fighters from the Carrier Combat Air Patrol spotted the Catalina and Dove. Within 7 minutes, the flying boat was shot to pieces and forced down onto the ocean. Birchall and his crew were captured, but the transmission had gotten through. Not all of it, but enough. Ceylon knew the Japanese were coming. Within hours of Birchall's warning, air defenses across Colombo and Trincomalee went to full alert. RAF Hurricane squadrons scrambled to readiness. Anti-aircraft batteries were manned. Merchant ships and supply vessels were ordered to clear the harbor. The warning Birchall had transmitted at the cost of his freedom, and nearly his life, had given Ceylon one more night to prepare. Dawn broke over Colombo on April 5th, Easter Sunday. At 7:30 in the morning, radar operators picked up a massive incoming formation. Approximately 127 Japanese aircraft were inbound, and Commander Fuchida was leading the charge, expecting to find the Eastern Fleet at anchor, expecting another Pearl Harbor. He found something very different. The harbor was nearly empty. Somerville's dispersal plan had worked. Instead of a fleet of battleships and carriers sitting still in the water, Fuchida's pilots found a handful of ships, a destroyer, an auxiliary cruiser, and some smaller vessels. The Japanese bombers raked the port facilities and the dockyard, started fires, and damaged infrastructure. But there was no Eastern Fleet to destroy. The bomb patterns that had been planned for battleships and carriers fell on empty moorings. The RAF Hurricanes came up to meet them. Ceylon had nearly 40 serviceable Hurricanes in the air around Colombo, and they fought hard. The British lost 19 fighters in the engagement. The Japanese lost 7 aircraft. A formation of 6 Swordfish torpedo bombers caught in the wrong place at the wrong time were intercepted and shot down. But for all the noise and fire and loss, the Easter Sunday raid on Colombo achieved a fraction of what it was designed to accomplish. Nagumo's force was not finished, though. Japanese reconnaissance aircraft had been searching for the British ships that were not in harbor. At 1 o'clock in the afternoon, a search plane spotted HMS Cornwall and HMS Dorsetshire. The 2 heavy cruisers had been ordered to leave Colombo and were trying to steam south to rejoin Somerville's main force. They were in the open ocean, running hard, with no air cover. Nagumo launched a dive bomber strike. 88 Val dive bombers found the 2 cruisers and attacked with precision. Both ships were modern, well-armed heavy cruisers. Against 88 experienced carrier aviators who had been practicing their dive bombing technique since Pearl Harbor, they had almost no chance. Cornwall was hit by multiple bombs and capsized in 8 minutes. Dorsetshire lasted slightly longer before she too rolled over and sank. More than 400 men went down with the two ships. Survivors were left in shark-filled waters for hours before rescue vessels arrived. The destruction of Cornwall and Dorsetshire, carried out in the same waters and on the same day as the Easter Sunday raid, demonstrated exactly what the Kido Butai was capable of when it found a target. Had the harbor not been empty, the Eastern Fleet might have been lost. 4 days later, on April 9th, the Japanese launched a second major raid, this time against Trincomalee. The pattern repeated. British intelligence had anticipated the attack, and the harbor was again largely cleared. But HMS Hermes, the old carrier, was caught at sea with no aircraft on board. She had offloaded her planes to a land base the previous day. Hermes and HMAS Vampire were found by Japanese aircraft and sunk within minutes. Somerville's Eastern Fleet survived. The Japanese never found it at Port T over the following days. Nagumo's force withdrew from the Indian Ocean, and the Kido Butai would never return to these waters in strength. Within 2 months, the Battle of Midway would crack the Japanese carrier power in the Pacific and permanently shift the momentum of the war. But in April 1942, Japan was still expanding in every direction, and the Easter Sunday raid exposed just how close the entire Allied position in the Indian Ocean came to collapse. The British Eastern Fleet had survived, but it was too weak to contest the Indian Ocean. After the raids, Somerville relocated his main base to the coast of Kenya in East Africa, more than 3,000 miles from Ceylon. For the better part of a year, Britain effectively ceded the Indian Ocean to Japanese dominance. Supply lines were rerouted. India was threatened. The war in the Middle East was complicated by the uncertainty over the sea lanes. Winston Churchill, years after the war, reflected on those April days and said that the attempted Japanese invasion of Ceylon was the most dangerous moment of World War II. He concluded that if Nagumo's fleet had succeeded and Ceylon taken, Japan would have controlled the Indian Ocean from one end to the other. The link between Britain and India, between the Allies and the Middle Eastern oil that kept the war effort running, could have been severed. Leonard Birchall spent the rest of the war as a prisoner of the Japanese. He survived brutal conditions and continued to advocate for fellow prisoners throughout his captivity, an act of leadership that earned him further respect long after the war ended. Churchill called him the savior of Ceylon. He returned to Canada, continued his military career, and rose to the rank of Air Commodore. He died in 2004 at the age of 89. Mitsuo Fuchida survived the war, converted to Christianity in 1950, became a minister, and spent his later years giving lectures on peace. He died in 1976. The men of HMS Cornwall and HMS Dorsetshire, the men of HMS Hermes and HMAS Vampire, the RAF pilots who went up over Colombo on Easter Sunday morning in 1942, should be remembered as heroes. What remains is the record of what they faced and how close the line was between the world as it turned out and the world as it could have been. On Easter Sunday, 1942, Japan tried to break the last lock on the Indian Ocean. A Canadian airman, a British admiral's caution, and an empty harbor in the Maldives stopped them. Subscribe to World War II, Steel and Power for more great stories from this monumental era.